Hello, 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 and welcome to Comrades and Farms here on Truth Frequency Radio and the Farmacy Network. We're also streamed on iHeart, Tuned In, and TalkStream Live. Tonight is episode 8. It's October 6th, 2020, and I think we're going to start out a little bit to talk about honeybees. Those of you who follow my YouTube channel will have seen I just premiered a video on honeybees. I was finishing up hive inspection and starting winterization for those bees to get them ready for wintertime. But first, I want to go over here and welcome everyone who's in the chat. Here on YouTube, we have Cha-Cha, Geeky Gardens, Justin Goodearth, YTFP Chris, and I hope I haven't missed anyone over here. And I'll just take a look over here at the Truth Frequency Radio chat and welcome anyone who's in here. Fet Pamela Sissy, if you're still here, welcome. So tonight I want to jump into a little bit of talk about honeybees, and my friend Justin Goodearth, who's here on the YouTube chat, was talking about wanting to get bees and get started with bees. So maybe we'll talk a little bit about that as well, some of the basic equipment that you'll need to get started. But let's see. So today I started winterization for my honeybees, and that basically equates to helping them set up their nest for wintertime. There's a few different things that are critical to help them survive through winter, and I thought I would just talk about that briefly. Just a reference, I'm by no means an expert in this field. I just acquired bees in November of 2018, and I basically have had 2 years of actually keeping bees now to sort of come to understand them better, and I've learned a tremendous amount of information, but I still have a lot more to learn, as I do in many other things. I'm ever looking to learn more, I guess. Sort of an awkward way to say it, but you know what I'm saying. Honeybees, over the winter, basically what they do is they form, I guess I'll start out with how they survive the winter. They form what's called a cluster. It's usually about the size of a soccer ball, and they basically kind of surround the queen, and they work along their reserves of honey along those combs in a cluster together, and the bees circulate from the inside of the cluster to the outside so that nobody gets cold, and that way they're maintaining that heat inside the cluster. They hold about 95 degrees inside that cluster, and that's critical for them to survive the winter. If they can't do that, they'll freeze out and die. Now this last spring I had 2 colonies that died on me. At least one of them, I am sure, died of starvation. The other one, I think they froze out because they were unable to make the crossover from one honey frame set to another. And often that's a problem that bees run into. I guess I shouldn't say often. Frequently, when bees die from cold weather over the winter, it's because either they ran out of resources, honey, namely, or they were unable to make a cross from one honeycomb to another and maintain that cluster without exposing themselves to the cold. So up in Canada, Ian Stepler is a commercial beekeeper, and he has a YouTube channel here called A Canadian Beekeeper's Blog, and it's an excellent channel. Ian really goes into how he cares for his bees, how he maintains them, how he winterizes them. He goes into some really excellent detail, and he's got about 20 plus years of knowledge and experience in doing commercial beekeeping, so his information is really solid. He's not going to tell you anything he hasn't tested himself and doesn't know to be solid. So up in Canada, what he does is he actually has a truck specifically designed for picking up his beehives. He picks up all his beehives. He has somewhere between 12 and 1,500 hives spread out across, I think it's between like 10 and 20 yards. And he picks all his bees up and he brings them back into a winterization shed, which is basically a warehouse. And he maintains, I think it's -4 or -5 degrees Celsius. It's about 25 degrees Fahrenheit, in that range. Don't quote me on the exact temperature, but it's pretty cold. And so that might seem counterintuitive to you. You might think, well, if you want to keep honeybees and they want to hold the cluster at 95 degrees, why wouldn't I keep them somewhere near 95 degrees or even 65 degrees so they can maintain that temperature? And the interesting thing about it is when they go into that cluster state, they're not sending foragers out all over the place. They're not doing all this work that they are in the summertime. And so their energy needs and their energy consumption is much lower. So over the winter, it's actually more efficient for them to stay in that cluster, and they consume a lot less food or fuel in the form of honey, which is effectively carbohydrates and sugars. And so they're able to actually sustain longer periods of time at cooler temperatures in the cluster form than they would if they were in warmer temperatures. So here in New York, last year we had a really strange winter. We had some warm spells and some cold spells, and my honeybees went through a significant amount of honey. And I have to say, I think that if I was able to winterize them at a more steady temperature, I probably could reduce the amount of hive space that they need. For me here, I have 8-frame hives. I should mention that. And most beekeepers, and especially commercial beekeepers, use 10-frame hives. I got these 8-frame hives used from sort of a family friend, and he was moving and wanted to get rid of his bees, and I had the opportunity. I'd always wanted honeybees, and I'd never had the money to go out and buy honeybees, buy the equipment, all that kind of stuff. So just as this opportunity came up, I got a really good deal on it, and I took it, and I kind of jumped into beekeeping sort of unexpectedly and without really having much knowledge. So I kind of had to jump that learning curve really quickly. Anyway, so going back to the cluster and temperatures and stuff, Ian actually keeps his 10-frame hives. He brings his hives down to one deep super. And if you don't know what a super is, that's basically it's a honeybee box. It's those boxes that you see stacked in honeybee hives. And that box, typically in a 10-frame hive, is 10 frames wide. Go figure. And in an 8-frame hive is 8 frames wide. Anyway, Ian keeps his bees in one box over the winter. He basically compresses that colony down to one box. At the end of the season, as the queen dials back her egg laying, she reduces the number of eggs that are in gestation or occupying cells within the colony, and so a lot of cells that are normally occupied with eggs and brood and rearing new bees become available. And so he backfeeds his bees, what's called backfeeding, where he basically feeds them a sugar source outside, usually in a bulk feeder. Sometimes he uses 1-gallon buckets on top of the hives and lets them access it from inside the hive. But either way, he backfeeds his colonies so they can take all that sugar and fill in all those empty cell spaces. And in doing so, they have a much larger reserve of sugar available to them, and they're able to maintain that in that single box. It's a really nice contained space and contained way to do it. I have not been feeding my bees up to this point. I think I'm going to this fall based on the information I've learned from watching Ian and also Frederick Dunn's channel, and also Kay Lee over at the Honeystead. Those are 2 other YouTube channels, Frederick Dunn and Kay Lee. And Geeky, thank you for sharing the Canadian Beekeepers vlog link, and I don't know if maybe you'll share those as well here in the YouTube chat. But anyway, so I think I am going to end up feeding them. Probably will even feed them a little bit this fall to stock them up. But my approach has been more of I'm more of a conservative and more of a natural approach to things so far. But as I learn, I find that maybe my natural approach could be hybridized with a little bit more management. And so in watching him use this technique, I've decided I think I am going to back feed my bees a little bit. But basically, I usually keep my bees in 2 deep super boxes. That's one stacked on top of the other. And that top box is basically full of honey, and the bottom box is basically the brood and rearing box that the queen tends to stay in and do her laying in. At least if a colony is managing correctly, the queen should stay down in that bottom box and do all her laying down there, and all the brood rearing is done now down there. And then that second box acts as basically a food reserve for them. So if they start to run out of food in that lower box, they can work their way up into the top box and use that as resources. I like to do that because from my perspective, we've kind of taken over some of the management of honeybees' life cycle. But I think really they're really geared for maintaining their own colonies and for caring for themselves. And I really like that concept and approach for everything I do related to farming and nature. I really like to study and mimic nature and maintain as many natural processes as I can, and do everything and anything I can to exclude chemicals from any of those processes. That includes pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and any other potential toxin that might have a negative effect on the biological systems within which I'm working. So that said, that's sort of a summary of what I've been working on today, mostly, is to get those bees ready. Some of the things I do for that, I pull off. I had some extra super boxes on top that had comb in them, but the bees, because we had such a dry year this year and a really strange season, it was cold very late, and then we didn't get much rain until we really just finally got rain recently. We've had, a few rain spells here and there, but not enough to really replenish aquifers and not enough to support as much floral blooming and activity as we have had in other years. Last year was what I would call a perfect grow year. We got about an inch of rain every single week, once a week, temperatures in the 80s, sunny. It was just perfect growing weather last year, and my bees produced 110 pounds of honey for the 3 hives that I had, and one of those hives is a smaller colony, so that most of that honey came off of 2 of those hives. So that was really exciting and inspiring, and this year I didn't harvest any honey off. I did have one hive as a second swarm hive that I captured, had about 4 or 5 frames full of honey in it, and another 3 or 4 that were partially filled. And that was the 3rd box on top of the colonies, so that was actually a harvestable amount of honey. But I decided to just leave that on over the winter, and in the spring, when the temperatures come back up a little bit and they're able to work that propolis a little bit better. I should pause and talk about propolis a little bit for those who don't know. Propolis is basically tree sap that the bees harvest, and they use it as sort of a glue, and that's how they do all of their sealing. And it's also antibacterial and antifungal. So they seal their hive up with this, the whole inside of a hive. Excuse me. And actually, if you look at like my top bar hive inspection here on my YouTube channel, you'll see when I open that hive up that the whole inside of that hive is covered in propolis. Anyway, rather than disturb that, they can only work that propolis at warmer temperatures, and because it's starting to get cool out and I don't want to unseal another part of the box and leave it open to draft over the winter because they're unable to reseal it, I just left it on. In the springtime, I'll pull that box off once we get past the more formidable weather, and I will save that box and set it aside. And as swarms start to come out and I capture swarms into new boxes, I will probably pick a frame or 2 of that honey and drop it in with those new swarms, so that right from the beginning those colonies have a honey and food source to work off of until they can start foraging and bringing it in. They don't necessarily need that. They are actually quite capable of taking care of their own food supply, but it's nice to give them a little bit of buffer and just kind of give them some insurance that if they get a couple of rainy days and they can't get out to forage, they have plenty of food to sustain them until they can get out to forage and start building their colony up. It's a really nice way to ensure success. Of course, you could just feed them sugar water as well, but I really like the natural resources, and knowing what I know about polyphenols and flavonoids and plant secondary metabolites, and that nectar is basically full of these compounds, and that these compounds are medicinal and beneficial, and they have all sorts of interesting health related compounds in them. Many of them are even unstudied as of yet. I like to ensure that the colony has the best potential food source that it can available, and so that's why I like to put honey in with them as well. And I have a comment here in the chat, on the YouTube chat: English, please, farm. Am I not speaking English, Justin? I'm sorry. I'm probably speaking farm again, and I always confuse people when I do that. If you have a question about anything I'm talking about in the chat, by all means, don't be afraid to ask a question. I'm always glad to address them. I'm also just going to check over here on the TFR chat and make sure I'm not missing anybody in here who's asking questions or making comments. Doesn't look like it, but Geeky, my faithful mod, is putting those YouTube channel links in there for you too. So if you want to go and check out a Canadian Beekeeper's blog or Frederick Dunn's channel or the Honeystead, those guys are also available. I should mention I have tentatively made contact with Ian Stepler and Kay Lee from the Honeystead, and they've both agreed tentatively. We haven't set a date yet to come on as guests, and I think they're going to be excellent guests. And I'm hoping that maybe I can even get them to come back in the future on some recurring schedule, even if it's only once a year, because they both have excellent information and excellent YouTube channels, and I'd love to share some of that information with you. So the question I have here from Justin Goodearth is about propolis, and yeah, YTFP has it spelled correctly. It's Propolis, propolis, and it's basically the glue that they use for gluing hives together. So bees work with actually multiple different compounds here. Let me just clear my throat for a sec. I can find the mic. So bees work with multiple different compounds. The main ones that we'll talk about are wax, honey, and propolis, and those are the three that they basically harvest as natural resources. So okay, I have a question here from Justin asking me to explain more about propolis. Okay, so propolis is typically taken from trees. The bees collect it from trees. A lot of it comes from my understanding. I'm still, like I said, I'm still a noob here myself, but my understanding is a lot of it comes from spruce trees, pine trees, that kind of thing. So that sap that you see on those trees, they bring that in. I think they add some sort of enzyme to that to make it what it is. But if you take a sample of this propolis and put it in your fingers, it's really sticky, just like tree sap is, and it's really hard to get off, and it doesn't wash off easily with soap. I find my universal solvent for getting stuff like that off is coconut oil. I use that for taking off tree sap, grease, gasoline, all kinds of stuff, and it's a great food oil as well. Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked on different oils, but so propolis is that, and they basically use that to seal the hive up. I know people have even reported where a mouse got into the hive, and I don't know if the mouse died in the hive or the bees killed it, but when they went back into that colony the following spring, they found the bees had actually sealed the mouse off in the bottom of the hive completely. He was, coated in propolis like a mummy, so that his dead bones and stuff wouldn't infect the colony. Pretty amazing stuff. Is this propolis to seal up all the extra cracks and air spaces that they don't want airflow to come through on. And so when you open up a honeybee hive, when you take those super boxes apart, you'll almost always find propolis around the inside of that where they've sealed it so no airflow comes in. Bees are really efficient at managing airflow. If you look at natural colonies, you'll see that they tend to inhabit like hollow logs and places like that, and you'll see they typically only have one entrance, and that might seem like a bad idea from our perspective, or maybe like things would get stuffy in there, right? Like you can imagine like thousands of people in a room for days and days on end, months on end, and how stuffy that would get. Except that people, we don't have four wings on each of us, and bees do. And so they manage that airflow really well, and they actually manage and regulate everything in the colony: temperature, humidity, airflow, evaporation. It's really amazing how well they manage environments. So I don't know, does that explain the propolis part to you, Justin, before I move on from airflow to I guess we'll go to wax next. I think I covered most of it. So that's just a basic rundown on what propolis is and how they use it. And Geeky Gardens has a comment here. If you don't know it, Geeky Gardens also has a YouTube channel. It's Geeky Gardens. Go figure. And he says, I've heard you can sell propolis, but you'd probably need hundreds of hives to be worth the effort. You probably would. You can sell the wax too. Actually, the wax goes for good money. But actually, let's just talk about that quick. Wax is basically something that the bees in a certain age range, I think it's like days 7 to 15 or 18 in their life cycle, it's something that they secrete, and then they use that to build their honeycombs. And so sorry, I'm also reading the YouTube chat here, and YTFP Chris says, yes, the propolis is used for antibacterial and such lots of human uses. Yes, it's excellent for that. So the bees secrete the wax, and then they use that to build their honeycombs, and then they put the honey into the honeycombs, and then they seal that once it's evaporated down to a certain level in the honeycomb. They seal it and cap it, and that honey is usually below 17% water content, and that's like sort of the metric that we use as we harvest honey to determine whether it's honey that we can just put in a jar and store for any long period of time, or whether it's honey that needs to be put sort of at a priority usage and used up before it goes bad. I think really the cutoff typically is 19 or 20%. It depends on the beekeeper you talk to and what their standards are. But usually, for the most part, if the honey is capped off in the cells, then that honey is dry enough for long-term storage, because the bees won't put it into long-term storage like that unless it's up to that standard. So let's see, that's wax. And I wanted to talk about honey collection a little bit, but before I do that, I want to say that wax takes a tremendous amount of energy for the honeybees. It takes about a pound of honey to make about an ounce of wax, and so that's why you'll see honeybee wax prices are so high, is because you get so little out of it. I think when I harvested last year, and I didn't harvest all the wax, but I'm pretty sure, I have to go back and look in my logs, but I'm pretty sure I did a calculation on it, and I think I figured maybe 10% of the honey weight that you could harvest in wax weight if you took all the comb out of it. But of course, the downside of that is you have to supply something for the bees to start their new comb on, and you can use starter strips, but I use what's called foundations. These are flat wax strips that go into the frames, and they have like the hexagonal shape on it, and then the bees build out comb from that and then fill it with honey. So Justin Goodearth says, yeah, that helps, so that's good. And he says, I understand the process, just not the terms. Yeah, I know. It's a whole new set of terms to learn. I'm trying to cover all those pieces, and I tend to spiderweb off into all directions because there's so many pieces, but I hope I'm kind of staying on point here. And then it says, so do you compost the combs or leave for new cultivation? No, I definitely wouldn't compost them. If I can, I'll harvest wax off. But what I like to do is uncap the wax, where you just cut the cap wax off and you spin that out, and you save that comb and put it back. And then they don't have to build that comb out the following season. They have comb that's already drawn out, and it's full width comb, and they can basically finish making the minor repairs on it that are needed from the uncapping process, and fill it with honey and cap it. So when you think about it, if you have to use a pound of honey for every ounce of wax that you get, that means it's a 16-to-1 ratio basically for sugar to wax or honey to wax. And so it's an incredibly expensive process, and so many beekeepers, we try to save a lot of that comb and put it back into the colony, at least some of it, so that as they're working, they're not overloaded trying to build out wax while they're trying to collect honey, and then burning a lot of the honey they're collecting to make wax. I just got to check on the time here. I know we're coming up on the break here shortly. It looks like that's about 30 seconds away. So I don't want to get too much further into anything here at the moment, but I will say that we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about honeybees. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the honey collection stuff that they do and a couple of the really interesting eccentricities about honeybees. I just watched a Nova documentary yesterday, the day before, and every time I watch a bee documentary, I learn something new from it. Or I find a fact or something that I thought was a fact that disputes another fact that I thought was a fact. And so it always keeps me researching and learning, and it's always good to continue to do fact checking. All right, here we're going off to the break, so we'll see you guys on the other side of the break. on Truth Frequency Radio and also on the Farmacy Seeds Network YouTube channel. That's Farmacy, Farmacy, as in let food be thy medicine. Before the break, we were talking about honeybees. We talked about a whole range of things about honeybees, some of the different products that they make in order to maintain their colony, and some of the different natural resources. We were just coming around to talking a little bit about honey. And a lot of people seem to have a misunderstanding that honeybees create honey from pollen. But in fact, that is not true. While honeybees do collect pollen, the honey that they create actually comes from the nectar of the plant. And so they harvest the nectar of the plant and they hold that in their stomach. They actually harvest it with what's called their crevasse. It's basically, it's a long tongue. Very long tongue, and they're able to reach deep down into the flower and harvest the nectar out of the center of the flower. They take that into their stomach and it's mixed with enzymes, and then they bring that back to the colony, and the forager bees, who are the ones out collecting pollen and nectar and water and propolis and all these other resources, come back to the hive and they hand it off to the worker bees. The worker bees actually take the foraging bees and then they bring it up and they put it in a particular storage place, and they actually collect from each type of flower independently, and they store each type of nectar in the form of honey or in the form of nectar that's being converted to honey during that process. They actually store each type in its own cell, so they actually have honey put away in separate little wax jars all through the colony of different types of nectar. And I'm sure if you drill down into that deeper, you'll find that they probably use different types of nectar for different needs. I don't know much about that, but I know enough about plant medicines and the different plant phenolic compounds that are produced that, I got to imagine that if they're going through the trouble of doing that individually, that they're being selective when they go to use it as well. Anyway, they go out and collect the nectar from the flower. They bring it back. The foragers hand it off to the worker bees. The worker bees take that and put it in a cell, and at this point, it has the enzymes from the stomach of the bees in it. Yes, Kiki, bee spit. I know. It almost sounds disgusting when you think about it, but if you've ever had honey, you know it's not. So they put that in the cell, and then they go through a process where that cell is left open, and the bees, again, using their incredible environmental and management skills, maintain temperature and humidity in that colony, in that area, and good airflow. Basically, they take that nectar and dehydrate it down to honey, and through dehydration and the enzymatic process, it gets converted to honey, and that's that wonderful sweet stuff that we like to put on pancakes or in our coffee or just eat straight. And it's pretty amazing that when you consider that, how much work that really is for honeybees. I think it takes 12 honeybees their entire lifetime, which is about 40 days, depending on the time of the season and such. But it's about 40 days. It takes them their entire lifetime, 12 honeybees, to get 1 teaspoon of honey. So if you consider the amount of work in that, and I think they fly some 25,000 miles to collect all that. So when you consider all that, and you consider, one pound jar of honey, like say this empty jar here, if you're watching on YouTube, that takes a tremendous amount of work for those bees. So that's why I try to be very careful about not stealing too much from the colony. They've put a lot of work into it, and I want to ensure their survival so that they continue to produce it. So my friend Justin Goodearth here is out in Oregon. He's probably going to be on the show as a guest here too at some point, and we'll be talking a little bit about his operation. He uses Korean natural farming out there, and he's a cannabis grower and I believe breeder as well. And he says that beeswax in our CBD solve would be amazing, and I have to agree. I would love to try making a solve like that. Unfortunately, I'm here in New York still, and we haven't legalized cannabis here yet. There is medical use of CBD here, but no medical use for THC, no recreational use for THC, and it's pretty limited and restricted. So I look forward to brighter days when people finally come around to not making specific plants illegal when they are in fact incredibly capable medicinal plants. Just very frustrating for me, and this has been going on for a long time. Anyway, I don't want to get sidetracked on that whole topic. So he says about honeybees would be cool to hear about. Knowledge dump, please. Wow. There's so much to talk about, and I'm not sure I'm really qualified to go deep into that. Yeah, I don't think I am at this point. But I will talk about a little bit more about the honeybees and their collection process, because I think you'll find that interesting as well. And after I've done a little bit more research about medicinal facts of honeybees, or of honey, I'll go into it more. I do know that honey is good for digestive health. It's good for stomach health. It helps adjust the biology in the gut system, in the human gut. And it's also been used for burns, to help people heal with burns. I think there's a special combination that they use of egg whites and honey, the egg white providing protein and the honey providing antibacterial and antifungal properties. It is an excellent antibacterial compound. And in fact, some people even use it for taking cuttings of plants, and especially when they want to root a plant right on another plant, you can actually take a small soda bottle, slide it down over the branch of the plant, seal the bottom of the bottle off, put a little bit of honey in the bottom, and apparently, I've never tried this myself, but I think I will at some point. Apparently, that spot where the honey is, that plant will grow some roots in that spot, and then you can clip that cutting off, very low stress way of propagating, and plant that in the ground. I know I've read on that before, and yeah, Geeky Garden says honey helps me to avoid processed sugar. Yeah, it's interesting. I did some pretty deep research into sugar. Oh, and Justin says I've heard about using the cuttings like that too. Let's see. Geek said honey helps me to avoid processed sugar, and I was going to say, yeah, I did some pretty deep research on sugar a while back after I came across high nutrition plants and regenerative agriculture, and started to learn more about nutrition and how that really affects our not only our short-term health but our long-term health, and not only that, but how our DNA is replicated, whether in a good way or a bad way. And there are multiple different pathways that are affected by the food that we eat directly. And so anyway, so I learned about sugar and what a negative effect sugar has on the human body and the human system, and that's when I started trying to lean more toward natural sugars. And I did find that honey is supposed to be one of the highest on the index, the hypoglycemic index, in that it basically goes almost directly into the bloodstream. But I have to say, I've compared honey against maple syrup and against white sugar, and I find that the honey seems to have the least swing effect on my blood sugar, at least as far as I can distinguish it with my own body. And I really do trust my own body and my sense of where I'm at health wise. But that's what I do with it too, Geeky, and that's one of the many reasons I wanted to get bees, although even as much as I love honey, it was actually further down the list than some of the others, like pollination and just to study bees up close and that sort of thing. Anyway, Geeky Gardens also says, yes, it's a natural rooting hormone. And Justin Goodearth says, I use aloe, but would use honey also. Interesting. Had not heard about using aloe, but I have lots of aloe. I have a big aloe plant in a greenhouse. I might have to try that. We'll have to talk about that when you come on the show, Justin. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about Korean natural farming. I've listened to some excellent archives from the Bionutrient Food Organization on their website. They have a library with the archives of the soil nutrition conferences that they put on every year in conjunction with NOFAMAS. That's the Northeastern Organic Farmers Association of Massachusetts. And there was one year they had they had several guests and a whole array of guests basically who talked on Korean natural farming and on producing your own microbes, composts, and farm supportive plant foods basically on the farm, and Korean natural farming was at the top of that list, and there were some excellent discussions about that. I think that was 2016 nutrition conference. Don't quote me on that, but there was also a geologist on there who talked about how although we tend to think of geology as being very long-term release of nutrients and changes in soil and that sort of thing, he said that some of the studies that they've done, they've found that a lot of these nutrients released from rock are actually done on a much shorter term scale than we once thought. And he gives an excellent talk on that, and how the geology of the land that you're on, the geology of the rock underneath the land that you're on, has a tremendous effect on the trace mineral nutrition available to that soil and how well plants perform on it. And he even talked a little bit about how I forget where it was, but there were maple trees that had access to a limestone shelf underneath them, and those maple trees produced some of the most some of the best productive maple syrup. In other words, there was a lot more sugar content in it, a lot better calcium content, and a lot more trace mineral nutrition in that maple syrup. So interesting sort of sidetrack along those lines. And I have a comment here from YTFP Chris. Honey has many beneficial benefits, can also contain botulism in some cases, so it's important not to give it to children under 1 year old. Yeah, and I think a big part of that YT might also be to do with people not doing the Brix test, or not waiting till honey is fully capped, and probably canning with a little too much moisture in it, and that would that could possibly give that environment, that environment for botulism to have a chance. Interesting that happens. I haven't seen any cases of that, but it's a good thing to be aware of. Justin Goodearth says KNF, or Korean natural farming, regenerative, no-till, love them all, and I couldn't agree more. And I want to get back and play around with Korean natural farming stuff more in the future. I kind of switched off to using the AEA foliar feed products and that kind of thing, just to basically be able to guarantee that what I think I'm putting on is what I'm actually putting on, so I can specifically and directly address trace mineral deficiencies in plant health. As time goes on, I'm learning a tremendous more about plant health and plant nutrition, and how to manage that, and how that interacts with soil, and how to use cover crops to manage that more effectively. And eventually in the future, I'd like to maybe not entirely eliminate foliar feeds, because they're still such a powerful tool in the toolbox, but if I could eliminate, say, 90% of the foliar feeding I'm doing, that would be great. I really do want to close that nutritional loop here on the farm. Let's see, I have a comment here from YTFP Chris. It's low amounts, usually easily fought off by older children and adults on the botulism. Yeah, and that goes back to that quantum load concept with bacteria and viruses and all that, where they have to reach a certain population before they become a problem. And oftentimes, a big part of that is the environmental factor. If you've got really good gut biology in your system, most of these other bad microbes have a really hard time establishing a colony there, because there's nowhere for them to set their feet down and start, creating new colonies, colony forming units kind of thing, right? CFU. Oh, it looks like So Much Blue Line is in here. Welcome. BLB says he drop kick like button on the way in. Much appreciated. And let's see, Justin Goodearth says, yes, fungi can actually break down rock minerals and make it plant available. Rock dust doesn't work without fungal and microbial life. Yes, exactly, Justin. And that's why I'm really looking forward to having you on here, because that is so true. And that's one of the things that both John Kemp from Advancing Eco-Agriculture and NOFAMAS and the Bionutrient Food Association and Dan Kittredge, all of those guys can't stress enough how important that fungal life is. And that's a big part of why you see me with my cover crops and putting my beds to rest for the winter, I'm putting down the Sea Shield and Rejuvenate and BioCoat Gold, Biogenesis, and Spectrum Extra. The BioCoat Gold especially is a very high fungal inoculant. And so what I'm trying to do is establish that fungal biology in and on that soil throughout the winter, and then that fungi actually breaks down all that corn stubble and all that high lignin residue really pretty well by the time springtime comes around. And last year I did an experiment where I put on mulch about 6 or 8 inches thick, heavy grass mulch, and I thought that would stay on over the winter and I'd have a nice mulch layer in the spring. But because I did such a good job inoculating that soil and getting that soil's health and biology going, by April this year it was bare earth, and all there was like worm castings. You could see where the worms had come up and just finished off what was left, and it was just bare soil again, and I had to put down more mulch. And so that's another thing that's kind of driven me more in the direction of cover crops, because the cover crops will keep growing and they'll be adding more and more exudates and more basically captured sunlight to that soil. And that's really, really important to build really healthy soil and really strong colonies. And at the end of the day, I would way rather have an active fungal community than an active bacterial community in my soils if I want to achieve higher plant health. Those fungi, the bacteria have their place, but those fungi, they form mycelial networks, and they can communicate across those networks at light speed. They've done experiments in Russia where they injected a nuclear isotope into a fungal structure, and they're able to detect that isotope, they're able to detect that 20 miles away instantaneously. So what they're finding is these fungal networks are actually able to, at the plant's behest, grab nutrients from the soil. And not only that, but if one part of the community needs a nutrient and the other part has it, they can actually send it nearly instantaneously across this fungal network. And the science is still, the research is still being done on that, but that's where it looks like it's going. And if that is the case, boy, what a powerful tool. But either way, those fungal networks are really powerful tools as far as plant health and nutrition, and they're one of the most efficient forms of biology in the soil as far as facilitating plant health. And most people might not know it, but the bacteria and fungi in the soil are fed by the plant's exudates. And so when the plant wants to change what it wants to pull from the soil, it'll actually change what exudates it's putting out. For those of you who don't know, plant exudates are basically complex sugars that the plant produces. When it has excess, it sends those into the soil. When it has excess, I should say, over and above what it needs for the basics of photosynthesis for growth. And most plants are capable of this. It'll send those exudates into the soil and feed those microbial communities, and those microbial communities extract nutrients and feed back to the plant. And this process is a symbiotic relationship that goes on between the plant and the soil all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year if you have the right crop in your soil, and it'll survive cold temperatures. If you're in the north like I am, or if you're in the south, you probably can get away with a lot more than we can up here. Anyway, let me just take a look in the chat here. I haven't checked over on the TFR chat. Just want to make sure I haven't missed anybody in there. Nope. Geeky, thank you for sharing those links. And back over here on the YouTube, I'm just going to catch up on the YouTube chat quick. Doesn't look like I've missed anything in here per se. Let's see, we were talking about honeybees, and then we kind of veered off into fungal networks. I don't know where I was going from there, but yeah, you got me going, Justin. You got me fired up about fungi. Fired for fungi. And I believe Justin is also a psilocybin grower out there, or in the process of getting permits or something like that. I'm not sure exactly where you're at in that process, Justin, but that's awesome. For those who don't know, psilocybin has long been looked at as a psychoactive drug that has no medicinal use. And thanks to Paul Stamets and many other researchers that are doing some groundbreaking research with psilocybin, they're finding that psilocybin, both in megadoses like people do to trip, and in microdoses that would say not give you a trip, actually have tremendous benefits for neural health and for regrowing neural networks and learning and forming connections between different ideas, thoughts, and concepts. And it's not just psilocybin. Lion's mane has also been shown to do this. I'm pretty sure maitake has as well. And I know there were others that he talked about. I think was it canadensis? I think it was canadensis. Anyway, so a lot of interesting information coming about that. If you haven't seen that talk, Paul Stamets just put up a talk back in January or February of this year. It's about a 45-minute long talk, and he talks about all the not all of them because there's a lot of them, but he talks about many of the medicinal benefits of those mushrooms, including psilocybin, and he also talks about the neuroregenerative effects of these, especially helpful for people who have Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, or have been in a car accident and had nerve damage or brain damage. Incredible recovery capability from that. So some very interesting information here. I have a comment here from Justin. It says, yes, great for neurogenesis. Yes, that's the word I was looking for. Also want to mention how they used slime molds in Japan, according to Paul Stamets, to streamline the Japanese subway system. Yes. And so that, I think, is from the talk. I think that's from The Future is Fungi with Paul Stamets, which is a documentary that came out, boy, that must be 5 or 6 or 7, maybe more years ago now. But he talks about how they did an experiment with what they consider with a slime mold, which, if you're not a mycology expert, or if you're not studied in mycology, you might not know slime molds are considered to be one of the least capable, or least, like the lowest on the evolutionary chain of fungi stepladder, so to speak. Well, they did an experiment where they basically took all the station points of the Japanese subway system, and they mimicked those in a map in a slime mold test, and they inoculated this medium with a slime mold to see how it would connect those points, and it actually connected those points more efficiently than the Japanese engineers when they designed the subway system. And they tried to design that subway system as efficiently as they could, and it's actually considered to be one of the most efficient subway systems still on this little blue marble of ours today. So it's really impressive that the slime mold was able to connect that in an even more efficient manner. If you haven't seen that talk, it's Paul Stamets, The Future is Fungi. It is an excellent talk. It's about an hour and 15 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes, and he talks about all the different effects of fungi, how most of the species that have survived on this planet have paired with fungi in some form or fashion, and how fungi are capable of surviving extremes that most other bacteria, fungi, and creatures on this planet are not capable of surviving. And so when you pair with the fungi, that gives you a much better opportunity at success of survival. So really interesting information there. So let's see. Justin Goodearth also says, also lion's mane is very good for neurogenesis as well. Yes, Justin, I was taking that up until I ran out recently, and I'm waiting until I can get the funding together to get another bottle of that. But when I can, I'm going to. I have to say, the effects are really subtle, but I definitely noticed a huge difference in my ability to grasp concepts and ideas, and especially my ability to connect ideas across multiple genres, so to speak, of seemingly very different topics and subjects, and to start to see the connections between them. Lion's mane is just an awesome tool, and you can you can go out and harvest it yourself if you know what you're doing, and if you're not don't know what you're doing and you just want to get those effects, you can go on Amazon or you can go to Paul Stamets' website. I think it's fungi.com, and you can order that. You can order that in the capsule form and just take a capsule every day. And that's what I'm doing until I can get. Well, that's a whole nother story, but until I can get my own mushroom farm online here where I'll be growing lion's mane, shiitake, and many other medicinal mushrooms for all the different immunological and neurogenesis effects that they have. Mushrooms are a very powerful tool, both for human health and also in the soil. So, very exciting. Justin says, yes, dating my mycology. Yeah, I hear you, Justin. I'm in love with my honeybees, and I'm in love with my mycology too, but my honeybees just fascinate me more these days. And he says, a map of oatmeal introduced a slime mold and most efficiently created the network. Yes, exactly. And Paul, in that talk, he actually talks about how fungal networks use oxalic acid, which is really interesting as part of that process, and discover what's out there and collecting information back. All right, we're going to the break. We'll see you on the other side.
So why would I want to buy one of these, Mr. Radio Shack Manager?
Why would you want to buy one? Because now everybody's a chemical or vegetarian.
Hello, hello. Welcome back to Comrades and Farms here on Truth Frequency Radio and the Pharmacy Seeds Network YouTube channel. Before the break, we were talking about fungi. We started off the show talking about honeybees and some of the different pieces about honeybees. And actually, that reminds me, I want to circle back around. There's some interesting things about honeybees I wanted to share that I hadn't shared yet. So it's really interesting. Honeybees communicate primarily through pheromones. And so everything that happens in the colony is kind of dictated by the queen by pheromones. You know, obviously the honeybees each have their own individual jobs and they sort of fit those jobs, but the queen really sort of dictates what's going on in the colony. Interestingly enough, if the queen is not doing her job and the honeybees become disenfranchised with her, they can actually they will actually start building a queen cell, and as the queen goes through and lays eggs, she'll usually fill that queen cell, and then the honeybees will rear that queen up, and they can actually kill off an old queen that they're disenfranchised with and rear up new queens from it. When new queens hatch out, often the honeybees will rear multiple new queens up, and the new queens will come up, hatch out, and then they'll do battle over who's going to be in charge of the colony, and whoever loses obviously loses as a nature in a devastating way, and she dies, and the surviving queen becomes the new queen of the colony. And so that's a really interesting thing. Another thing to note, honeybees actually can smell with both their crevasse, their tongue. They can actually smell and taste the flowers, but not just with their crevasse or tongue. They can actually smell and taste flowers with each of their feet. So they can actually, land on a flower and determine whether or not that flower has, the Brix content that's required for them to collect it. By the way, honeybees won't collect nectar from a flower. They won't collect nectar that is lower than 7 Brix. If you're not familiar with the Brix scale, that's a measurement of how much sugar is in solution. 7 Brix would be 7% sugar content. And of course, they would want to seek higher sugar content because that's less evaporation for them to do to end up with honey out of the process. So that's another interesting thing about honeybees. And there are thousands more interesting facts like this, and I'm trying to learn as many as I can and memorize them, but it's a lot of information. But every time I think about it and learn something new about it, I'm so fascinated. That one really blew my mind. It made me think, boy, what would us humans do if we had to walk around and everything our feet touch we tasted and smelled? Can you imagine the gym socks? Ugh, horrible. Anyway, welcome back, Geeky. Glad you made it back from the break. I don't know where you guys want to go tonight any further. I had other ideas earlier in the day, but I hadn't written them down. It's been sort of a busy day for me between winterizing honeybees and getting the greenhouse furnace up and running and getting things, sort of ready for the next phase here on the farm. I also am in the I finished tonight, but I was in the process earlier of refilling the ram pump reservoirs. The ram pump is still not back online, even though we got 2¼ inches of rain last week. That was all absorbed into the soil. None of that has made it back into the aquifer, at least as of yet. I find our aquifer, if we get a good rain event that will actually help refill the spring aquifer, I find that takes about 72 hours from when the rain event happens until when the aquifer actually refills. But anyway, so it's been about a week, maybe even be as much as a week and a half since we had that excellent rainfall that we did get. And the spring pond, the spring is still not producing any water, and the pond is still relatively low. So I'm still using the foliar feed pump as a way to supplement and refill the ram pump reservoirs for use in the greenhouse and for watering chickens and all that sort of stuff. Let's see. YTFP says, just like flies, correct? Owe them for things like vinegar and sourdough, crawling on things with their feet, and also committing suicide and things. Yeah, I don't know. Do flies taste through their feet also? I really don't know as much as I should about flies, except that I despise them and I kill them when they're in my house. I hate flies because they just drive me nuts. But I guess I don't think I'm alone in that. Anyway, Justin Goodearth says very efficient process, and so it's interesting if you've watched any of my bee videos. I very frequently try to get good close-ups of honeybees working in different flowers, various flowers from various angles, and it's really amazing. I've done a couple of videos where I showed them working in those flowers, and then I did like a 0.3x slow-mo version of that, so you could actually slow down and see what they're doing, because they go through a flower so fast it's actually hard to keep up with them on the camera. You'll see a honeybee like come up, land on a flower, go through all of the little clusters on that flower, and figure out if anything has anything in it, nectar wise or pollen wise. They'll extract those resources and boom, right on to the next flower. It's amazing how fast they do it. And when you consider that each forager goes out for approximately an hour, they only visit one type of flower, and they come back full with nectar in their stomach, and they usually will come back with pollen as well, not always bringing pollen, but it's interesting. They use the nectar to help stick that powdery pollen to their pollen sacs so they can bring it back. And if you didn't know it, a honeybee can actually fly with resources equal to their own weight, and they can fly up to like 30 or 35 miles an hour. It might be as much as 40. They can really cruise, and they can forage up to 6 miles away from the colony. So can you imagine being a honeybee that small, flying 6 miles with your own weight over your back and carrying that back to the hive, and then you're going back out again and doing that for another hour? Just really amazing creatures. And Justin says, I have a zapper that I collect insect frass from and compost it. We don't waste anything. That is awesome. And YTFP Chris says, regarding the flies, he said, not suicide, accidental drowning. Yeah, well, I suppose it's how you rule the death, huh? Go see David Paulides at Missing 411 about that, huh? That's a whole nother topic. Anyway, I'm not sure where else you guys want to go tonight, and if you have any further questions about bees, or if you want to talk more about mycology or plants or any of that kind of stuff, I'm more than happy to go in sort of any direction. I'm still trying to get my proverbial manure together here for the show. Most days I sit down and write up some show notes in advance and try to have some topics ready, but tonight I'm just sort of shooting from the hip, and I'm really looking forward to having guests on soon, as that'll help me kind of fill the space in. It's not always easy to sit and talk intelligently for 2 hours, even with the breaks. Speaking of the breaks, I do want to address the breaks for the people who don't know, who are on YouTube or just aren't familiar. This show is streamed both on Truth Frequency Radio and on the Farmacy Network YouTube channel. On Truth Frequency Radio, we're connected to the network there, and we're streaming through iHeart, Tuned In, TalkStream Live, and I'm not even sure. I think there's other streams that go out as well. But because of that, we have commercial breaks that we have to pause for every half hour, and so that's why when you see me go to the break, that's why we're going to those breaks, is because we have commercial breaks that we have to accommodate when we're connected to the Truth Frequency Radio network. If you haven't checked out Truth Frequency Radio, there's a whole host of incredible, a whole array of incredible hosts on Truth Frequency Radio, and you should check them all out. I'll name a few of them who I've become good friends with over recent months, and whose shows and content and personalities and company I really enjoy. One is Brent Thomas from the Paranormal Portal. Brent streams Friday and Saturday nights here on Truth Frequency Radio, and also on the Paranormal Portal YouTube channel. They explore all sorts of paranormal stuff. Always an excellent discussion. He's had different guests on. Pretty sure you had Wes Germer on at one point from Sasquatch Chronicles. I know he just recently had Vic Cundiff on from Dogman Encounters, and a whole bunch of other awesome guests. And he actually had me on a couple of times too. We talked about water and how it relates to spirituality, and health and nutrition and how that relates to spirituality. So if you haven't checked those episodes out, Also on Truth Frequency Radio, Quantum Connections, my good friend Elizabeth McCabe, aka Lucky One, and she has a show called Quantum Connections, and she talks about all kinds of stuff, but she's really trying to tie together how things all over the planet are connected on a quantum level, and what an excellent show. She had me on there as a guest as well. We talked about critical points of influence and plant health and farming and all kinds of interesting stuff, and I look forward to collaborating with her in the future as well. What else? Let's see. I think there's also Duke also has a show. What is Duke's show? World Bigfoot Radio. Sorry, it took me a second. And he's on, I think he's on after the Paranormal Portal. Oh, and also Paisley Wild of The Spaces Between. Paisley is a pagan, a plant medicine person, and she has an interesting show. And she recently she's doing a series on chakras. So there's a ton of awesome content on Truth Frequency Radio. So if you're not familiar with Truth Frequency Radio, please do check it out and check out some of the other shows. Of course, you can always go back and see the archives. You can go back up to 2 weeks on our shows on Truth Frequency Radio, and then if you want to see Comrades and Farms previous episodes to that, at least for now, they're available on YouTube long term. I may change that at some point in the future, but for now you can go back and see the old shows, including some of my first shows. And you can see me kind of getting my feet wet here on the straddle dual stream thing. Let me just catch up on the chat here for a minute. Justin Goodearth says, "Yeah, that's why I don't go live. I have a hard time just talking to myself or to a chat." Yeah, I hear you, Justin. It's taken me a while to get used to doing the live streams. For the first couple of years, I never even put myself on camera at all. I just focused everything on the plants and the farm, and I really actually prefer that. I don't want the show or the videos that I do to be about me. It's not about me. It's about plant health, plant nutrition, and helping people understand that better and implement it in their lives in a meaningful and transformative way, so that they can improve their life and the health and quality and vitality of themselves and the ones around them. Because let's face it, when we're in better health, we're in a better mood. And we're in a better mood, we can discuss all sorts of topics and come together on a community level and move forward in a fashion that's beneficial to everyone in the community, rather than having these little spats that we see. Like, I don't even watch TV or news or any of that stuff. I don't get involved in any of that politics stuff. I just can't stomach watching the whole toxic environment that seems to develop around those things. So that's sort of my end goal, is to improve the health of the people, plants, and animals on this planet, and the soils in the process of that, and preserve our ecology, and not just preserve our farms. People talk about sustainable farming, but we really need to be focused on regenerative farming, because most of the current agricultural systems that are here today are degenerative. They're actually decreasing soil health and plant health. They're eroding soils. They're causing all kinds of problems in our ecosystems. And if that's our standard and we think we're going to sustain that, and we're actually degenerating, what are we sustaining? We're not sustaining anything. So we have to really actually go the other way. We have to jump into regenerative agriculture and learn how to use plants and soils and the tools that plug into those plants and soils in a powerful way, so we can regenerate soils and health, and that health and immunity will translate onto the plants, onto the humans and animals that consume those plants. And so that's really important in the big picture of things, so to speak. So Geeky, thank you for sharing the link to Truth Frequency Radio. That's https://tfrlive.com. tfrlive.com. So let's see. Justin says Duke had a really good premiere earlier today that everyone should check out. And yes, community knowledge and closed loop systems. Yes, closed fertility loop systems, I think is what Justin's referring to there. And yeah, I did see his premiere go up, but again, I was busy trying to get 10,000 things accomplished and together, and then still be here and present for the show. So I don't know what direction you guys want to go in tonight. I don't know if you guys have any more questions. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you have any specific topics you'd like to go off into, we can. I don't know. I'm looking for ideas here. So don't be afraid to throw some out. While you think about that or respond to that, I'm going to just go over and check on the chat here at Truth Frequency Radio and just make sure I haven't missed that. For those who don't know, there's also a chat on Truth Frequency Radio, and you can chat with other people who are listening to the show while you're listening to the show. So kind of a nice tool. 1 second here. All right, had to clear my throat. I don't want to blow eardrums out in the process. Yours, not mine. Let's see. Yeah, closed loop systems. So I don't know. Maybe I'll talk about closed loop systems a little bit because people might not understand what that means. That concept is basically we're trying to close a fertility loop so that we generate and retain all the fertility that we create on our farm, that we're not having to constantly ship in more nutrition all the time in order to do that. Yes, Justin, I do take calls, and I do think I can actually handle taking a phone call now that I have some of the stuff worked out. Also, I want to throw a big thank you and shout out to you, Justin. Last night we hooked up on Skype last night, and Justin helped me. Just gave me someone to connect to and help me sort out some of the problems that I was having with the using Skype as far as streaming Skype to YouTube and also to TFR at the same time. There's a few different connections that have to happen together, and I hadn't had an opportunity to do any testing outside of the live stream, and so I was sort of apprehensive about having a guest on. I had Jim and Jessica from the Green Dream Project. Big shout out to those guys on their YouTube channel is the Green Dream Project, and I had those guys on as guests back in one of my first shows, and something happened with the stream, and their interview didn't come through on TFR, and so I didn't want to go through that again until I had my end of things sorted out. I felt really bad that happened to those guys because I have a lot of respect and admiration for them and what they're doing out in Arizona. They're doing some incredible stuff on their homestead out there. No, Justin, we didn't hook up. I didn't mean it like that. I meant we hooked up informationally, not to be mistaken for other things, we'll say. If you want to call in, Justin, you can. I'll, if you call in, just let me know, and I'll pick you up on the call board, and we'll go from there. Hopefully, everything will be working okay. I think I'm connected to the call board correctly and have things sorted out finally. It's taken me a while to get my feet wet here, but. So closed loop systems, basically what we're trying to do is retain the fertility on the farm and generate all the fertility we can on the farm and import as little as possible. And so oftentimes when I talk about that in the same context while I'm talking about foliar feeds, people say, you're buying foliar feeds. Why are you buying foliar feeds if you're trying to close the utility loop? And if you go back to episode 6, I think it was, I talked pretty in depth about foliar feeds. And there are also plenty of excellent videos and information from Advancing Eco-Agriculture on foliar feeds as well. But if you go back and check out episode 6, I went in pretty deep as to how foliar feeds are an excellent tool in the toolbox to achieve building our soil health up, to achieve building our plant health up at a really rapid rate, and we're able to address specific trace mineral deficiencies and increase photosynthesis much more rapidly than we would be able to ordinarily. And so that's why that's one of the tools that I use. And also, it's one of the most efficient tools from a material perspective. You can put a very small amount of material on in the form of a foliar feed and get a tremendous growth response, and it just doesn't consume much material to do it. And in the process, that tremendous growth response unlocks many of those same minerals and nutrients that are needed. It unlocks those in the soil because now the plant has tremendous extra photosynthetic energy, and it can send a whole bunch of extra exudates down to the soil, feed those microbial communities, and those microbial communities can unlock that nutrition and send it back to the plants. So it's sort of a synergistic effect that you get out of that. So very exciting means of achieving that. So let's see. I think that's about 5 dings. Where's Bomber from Geeky Gardens? Oh, you got it. That might work. I don't have a way to pipe over to. I don't have a way to pipe over to Truth Frequency Radio that way, Justin. So if you can call in on that number I dropped before, that 213 number, 213-233-3998, and I'll drop that in here again. If you can call in that, I'll pick you up on the call board. I don't have it quite sorted yet how to pipe over to Truth Frequency Radio from OBS Studio into Skype. So for those who don't know, I'm connected through Skype to Truth Frequency Radio, which connects me to the Truth Frequency Radio network. And then for YouTube, I'm using OBS Studio. And so they're sort of two separate streaming things. And I haven't figured out how to pipe audio over to TFR or over to the Skype program to send it across to TFR. So that's why you see me working this way. And I guess Geeky was asking about where Bomber's at, and I think Chris Driver was saying she's over on another show talking about her encounter stories. So no worries on that. Hope that's all going well. I'll have to go check some of those encounters out because I've heard a few and they're interesting. Okay, and I think is that you calling in now, Justin? Oh yeah, it must be you. So area code 971. You're on the air. Hello, Justin. How are you? Hey, it's working. Awesome. Good. How's it going with you?
It's going good. I really enjoyed the show tonight.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to hear you say that. What did you call to talk about tonight? I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. I can hang on a sec. I'm getting a report here that through on the YouTube side of things. Is it coming through there now, Geeky? And if not, do I have to? I just want to make sure your audio is coming through. I want people to hear what you're saying. And for those who are listening or new listening, I apologize. I'm still, like I said, I'm still working out the studio side of things here. Don't care. Oh, that's much better. That's much better. Can you guys hear him any better now? YTFP and Geeky Gardens. YTFP says I can't hear him as loud as you were hearing someone talking on the cell phone. You could hear from the earpiece from across the room, and it says we're getting echoes. So his audio is there but faint. Oh, yeah, that should be better, I would think, Justin, because you just came up much louder to me. So maybe that's what it was. Anyway, yeah, I agree. And, John Kempf, when he talks, he always says that biology is the trump card. And, the more I look around, the more I find that, most of these soils actually have many of the trace. Oh, there's the break. I guess we'll pick it up on the other side of the break. All right.
So why would I want to buy one of these, Mr. Radio Shack Manager?
Why would you want to buy one? Because now everybody's a can cooler of its own.
Waiting for OBS Studio to finish transitioning. There we go. And let me just see. I don't know if I have my mic live. I think I do. And I got you live. Awesome. So let's just see if everybody can hear us here on YouTube now. Can everybody hear Justin okay? Justin, say hello.
Hello. Can everybody hear me well? Am I echoing?
You sound good to me on this end. We'll see what they say in the chat here. Looks like Bomber just came in. Welcome, Bomber. How are you? Good to see you. And YTFP Chris says, still can't ID your yellow plant farm. It's either a mustard or a species of yellow rocket. Oh, that flowering one that the bees are in. Yeah, I think it might be a mustard too. I'm going to have to look that up. Audio is good. We're good to go, Justin. All right. I don't know what you were saying before we got interrupted with the break, but if you remember, go ahead and carry on.
I was rambling about soil life and mycology. I really think mycology and indigenous microorganisms are like a super staple for your farm. If you're going to start growing anything on your own property, you need to, first of all, balance all of your soil life. Your soil life needs to be healthy, and I think it really needs to kind of jive with you. Like my wife and I and my son, we all live here together, and we have a roommate actually, but we all follow the same house rules. We compost the same stuff. We don't put any plastics, glass, anything. We only burn organic material in our fire pit, and we put that into the compost. The whole, pretty much, our whole farm life works together. It all goes into the same, life cycle.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I think I was talking to you over the break about it. Just saying that John Kempf in his talks, he always says that biology is the trump card, and man, is that accurate. A lot of those trace mineral nutrients that we need for plants and for good plant health and to support plant immunity are usually in the soil, but they're often not available. And the interface to access those is that biology. So if you can facilitate that biology, you're 95% of the way there if you can get that soil on and going. And that's a big part of what I'm trying to do here on these heavy clay soils I have here is to stimulate that biology, both through inoculants and also through the use of plants and their exudates, helping to release that soil and build that soil and, create that humic organic matter that is, sort of a long-term bank account for nutrients for plants. So I couldn't agree more, and that Korean natural farming thing is just an awesome concept and an awesome approach to doing things. And I'm really looking forward to having you on as a guest, and we're gonna really cut into that. I hope you can really share forward some of that more intimate information that I'm not even familiar with yet.
Well, I'm not, I've only been getting into Korean natural farming for about the last probably 4 years. I first got into no-till regenerative farming and I don't know, really natural soil growth. It was probably about 9 years ago. I stopped using bottle nutrients and things like that and started growing life on my own.
That's funny. That's about the same time frame. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I started reading Jeff Lowenfeld's work and started getting into teaming with microbes and teaming with fungi, and I got into balsamics and started just really diving into all these different natural growing methods that you really don't need all the added nutrients. I mean, added inputs are a good thing. I mean, that's it doesn't hurt to push, right? Yeah. But your base gardening should be natural. It should come from your soil, from your the life around your farm.
Yeah.
And that also, I feel like includes spiritually and connecting with the plant physically.
Absolutely.
You know, it's not just what you put into the soil; it's what you put into the plant.
Yeah.
You walk around and you talk to them and you clean them and you prune them and you're working with the plants, and it's a natural interaction.
Yeah.
It's the entire farm interaction.
Yeah.
And growing polyculture too, you want to grow everything together.
Absolutely.
Because I first started learning about polyculture because I was having such a problem with IPM issues, right? I was getting tired of spraying.
Yep.
So I started bringing in all these predator mites and everything, and shit, I've smoked too much Congo. But all of my predator mites and my soil bugs and everything I started adding all this stuff in, and I was like, well, how am I going to feed those, you know? And what if there's no mite for my predators to eat? How do I keep them healthy and make them reproduce and come back next season and everything? So I'm looking at all this, and then I realized, okay, well, you got to have a lot of pollen and everything, because your predators that eat mites, the bad mites, need pollen to live on if there's no mites to eat. And so you have to create an entire environment.
Yeah.
And without thinking of it...
Go ahead.
Right. Without thinking of it in a super technical way, you just basically, you make a good environment for everything. And it's a very simple concept to grasp.
Absolutely.
If you can look at it, wide spectrum from a distance, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
You don't need to be an entomologist and a botanist and all this to understand nature.
Yeah. You really
look at it from a wide spectrum.
You really almost have to change your psychology from this. Whoop, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. And I'm cursing.
Oh no, it's okay. It's okay.
The redwoods don't need your help to grow, right? They're massive, big, 150-foot diameter trees that you can drive your car through. And the sequoias, the Northern California, Southern Oregon, all this. Nobody's out there watering this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a whole. You really have to change your whole perspective from, our Western society has this reductive mentality about everything. Like you were talking about your evolution from, I had to get, predator mites to take, or predator, I think it was mites to take, or predator wasps to take care of the mite problem. And then I wanted to figure out how to keep that community alive. And then, you start looking at it, it's like, yeah, well, no, the whole problem is we're looking at it from like, we're trying to figure out what specific thing we need, when really what we need to do is look back at nature and say, okay, everything is an ecosystem. If we try and study and mimic that concept and bring that ecosystem concept back into our farming practices, all these pieces fall into place on their own, and all we have to do is kind of help facilitate the health of those communities. And it's a whole perspective change from what our current, agronomical systems are today, or agricultural systems are today. They have this that same Western mentality of reduce it to the smallest thing in the system and just look at that. Well, you're not looking at the rest of the system, and as soon as you exclude the rest of the system, you might as well just be staring at a brick wall, right?
Right. You're just wasting your time, basically. You're playing God.
Right. And doing a horrible job of it, I might add.
Right. Like, how can you presume that all of these things that are naturally occurring in nature that have been doing it for millennia?
Right.
All of a sudden, the argument that I have with my those of you that don't know, I have a business that I contract people and myself out to farms, local cannabis farms, to help them with whatever they need. Right? Basically, we're a contractor company. They have no liability, and they have no overhead. They just hire us as basically contractors to come in and do whatever they need us to do. We're experienced help that they don't have to pay insurance on.
Yeah, carry SSI and all that business overhead. That's awesome.
Right. This was my idea because it makes it easier. And the cannabis farms here in Oregon still aren't able to bank or anything. So I thought this was great. And honestly, it's been a really profitable plan. But we go to these places and they go, why are my plants struggling? You know, and I'm like, well, it's because you have them in these little pots and you're trying to feed the snot out of them with all these nutrients. You're playing God. This isn't ever going to work.
Yep.
It'll work for this yield, this amount of yield that you're getting now. And you might be able to push them to go a little further, you know, with brighter lights, you know, but you're going to spend more energy doing all of that. And you're going to spend a lot more money in nutrients and everything. And you're going to have to worry about deficiencies because you're
messing with the balance.
You're enabling a plant. It's like a human that's being injected with all of this biochemistry and also injected with all this stuff to keep them from viruses and disease.
Yeah.
And
next thing you know, you're pouring antibiotics and pesticides and everything else on there, and now you're disrupting the system more, and then things start crashing, and now you're going the other direction. All of a sudden, you're like, "What happened? I was putting good nutrients on, right?"
All right. Don't mess with nature. There's no reason to. If you grow organically and regeneratively, the terpenes are so much better. The flower comes out so much more dense and nice, and it's stupid.
Yeah.
The only growing method that I've ever dealt with on an industrial scale, for sure, and certainly on a personal scale, like if somebody's growing in their backyard or whatever, that's a given. Most people grow out here in Oregon and Northern California. They grow no-till, you know, in the ground, natural, organic growing. But these farms, they're just pushing and pushing and pushing, and they're trying to put out more and denser and more terpy stuff, and they're just adding all this crap. But the best farms that I've seen beyond KNF, like no-till style organic farming, is aquaponics.
Yes.
Because aquaponic farms,
it's still using the natural system. Yeah.
They're actually pumping in natural shit, and that's a natural growing process.
Yes.
And they're using living fish, you know, to feed their plants, and they're not pumping in nutrients and all this stuff. It's a natural cycle.
Well, they've basically taken the organic soil system and added the water cycle system into a small mimicked version of a bigger environment, and it's really effective.
Right. Exactly. They're making like an indoor stream, and they're growing fish, and they're pulling from a pond that fish are pooping in.
I so want to do that in my greenhouse here. I have to say, that's like on my list of things to do. It's just like, it's another piece of infrastructure to build, another investment to make. But I very much want to incorporate that concept into it. And I think that's awesome. It's funny that
you can definitely.
Oh, go ahead.
It doesn't have to be cannabis, and that's what a lot of my friends don't understand. You can grow everything in that system, and it really works out if you're trying to grow in a small space, like an indoor space or whatever. All you have to do is have one fish pond.
Yep.
It doesn't take a whole lot to grow aquaponically.
Yep. Well, let's.
You just have to have a loop system.
Let's be real here for a second. Let's just cut the proverbial manure, so to speak. Cannabis plants and hemp plants are one of the highest nutrient demanding plants that you can grow. And so if you can master growing them and their nutritional needs, everything else becomes a whole lot easier after that.
I would agree, but I didn't want to undercut anything else.
Well, no, I mean, it's,
But it is difficult. Like cannabis is touchy and especially because of the strain.
yeah. Each strain has a different nutritional requirement, different needs and wants.
Like
Yeah.
Landrace indicas come from like the Himalayas and mountainous,
Yeah.
high altitude mountainous region, and Landrace sativas come from like South Africa and desert regions, equator areas where there's just sun all the time. That's why a sativa, typically a real Landrace sativa, takes about 13 to 14 weeks in flower alone just to mature, because they're used to having sun year round.
Yeah.
So their winter cycle, when they are triggered to flower, is actually still like 80 degrees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really hard. It takes a long time to fully flower a sativa, a Landrace sativa. And indicas, they flower in 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And so that's what most growers grow.
Just because it's easier,
Especially in the US.
because it's easier, and the climate is more friendly to it.
Yeah, way convenient.
And it's also many less weeks to get
Right, but if you're
to
gonna
that harvest.
You're really going to cultivate that flower. Sorry, I was.
No, I was done. Go ahead. That's that Skype delay.
But it's like every other plant, right? If you're really going to cultivate that plant, you want to make it specific to that plant's ideal environment.
Yep.
Right? If you really want to fully cultivate any plant. So in your case, I would say that you're primarily growing, most of the plants that you grow are kind of indigenous to your region. And it's
Plus or minus,
easier for you to grow most of those.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas when you're growing cannabis or cubensis or whatever you're growing, the mushrooms I'm growing they're native to the Amazon, and I have to keep them around 80 degrees and a lot of moisture, like a rainforest.
Yeah.
And so it's really not indigenous. Northwest Oregon, it's like rarely gets above 90 degrees here, and it's usually pretty moist and everything, but it's not like a rainforest. It is a rainforest, but it's not like an Amazon.
It's not a tropical rainforest. It's a northern temperate rainforest, which is very different temperature-wise, right?
Right. So it's like everything I'm growing, I have to keep it some sort of different growing condition or whatever if I'm really going to keep it true to self.
And that's a lot of environments to
I'm going to have
manage.
to battle through some.
Yeah, battle through some problems.
Right.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I got to battle through some adversity, which I typically do in the greenhouse, because I'm growing everything in one greenhouse. I put it all out there.
To that point, that's funny you mentioned that, because I often have people on the amateur radio nets asking me about the greenhouse, and some of them are interested in having their own greenhouse, and they think that that's a really easy thing to manage, and I try to explain to them how difficult it actually is to manage a greenhouse, because during the daytime you have all the sunlight pouring in there, and that's creating heat, and that sunlight is great for photosynthesis, but all that extra heat, you got to dump that off when it's too hot. And then overnight here, we can get temperatures down in 0 degrees or -5 or -10. And so now you're trying to keep that thing at 60 or 70 degrees through plastic, which is not insulative. There's no R value there. It's like trying to heat the outdoors and then cool the outdoors in between. And the only time of the day that's really good for you is like late afternoon or mid-morning when the temperatures haven't swung one way or the other yet. The rest of the time you're just trying to like spin control the environment, basically,
Exactly. It's like a constant I try to set timers and things like that, put everything on a timer or whatever and automate as much as I can, but really most of it comes down to just physically getting out there, doing it, monitoring.
For sure. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm looking forward to having you on as a guest. And I know we're gonna be able to unfold a lot of this stuff that we've kind of touched on. It's funny that you mentioned, you kind of went through that whole evolution of. I forget the I forget the people that you mentioned, but there are also people that I came across in my journey in evolution, and I started out with that chemical nutrient thing too, and evolved to like, what am I doing buying these chemical nutrients? And then when I came across the regenerative agriculture stuff, and I realized that when you put those chemical nutrients down, you're compromising the biology in that soil for the entire rest of the growing season, and now you're dependent on chemical nutrients. Once I discovered that, I was like, oh boy, I got to change a lot of things I'm doing. Even though I thought I was growing organic, and I was trying to stick to that standard of not introducing chemicals, but sure enough, there was a lot of mistakes I was making, and still thinking I was doing the right thing. So that's a big part of what inspired me to start researching this more and sharing this information when and where I could with other people. So I'm really glad to hear you back that up. And I just want to throw a quick shout out to Grow the Farm Up. Brad from Grow the Farm Up is in here in the chat, so awesome to see him in here as well.
Yeah, I actually subbed to their channel. I love that dude. I don't comment a lot or whatever, but I've honestly subbed to a lot of those guys. I love the whole shoot, I can't remember what it was called. It was from the oh damn it, I can't remember right now what it was called. My weed is too strong.
Well, good for you. I wish I could say I had something here. But yeah,
the Green Dream Project. All those speakers that they had on that whole
that summit that they did was awesome, wasn't it?
The summit, yeah, that was great. I subbed to every one of them.
Yeah, I did too. I was
already subbed to you, so I didn't have to do that. But.
Yeah, they were awesome.
But yeah, a lot of good farmers and a lot of good information, and I love the whole concept of getting off grid. And honestly, that's one of the things that COVID has done.
Big time.
For a lot of people.
Big time.
By accident, I think. I don't think that was a planned thing, but a lot of people have gotten off grid and decided that they don't really need to do the things that they were doing before. People have become so much more independent and self-contained, I think, through a lot of this virus thing.
Yeah.
When you start locking people down and telling them that they can't go out, and people start to get resourceful.
Well, dude, it's like sending a little kid to their room. Go to your room and sit in your room and you think about that. Or, go home from work and sit home and you think about that. And it's like, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking I don't really want to go back to that 9-to-5 job that I hated so much, where the boss yelled at me all day and I was miserable commuting to and from, right? Like, people are like, this is a taste of what life is supposed to be like.
Yeah, you start to realize, I don't want to hear the work politics, and I don't really care what Bob thinks.
Yeah. And I sure as hell don't want to argue with my neighbor over which flavor politics is the one that fits me.
Yeah, I don't care what you're doing.
Yeah.
I just want to, get my things done and move forward, and you don't really need to go to these places to make money. My wife and I, and our son is living with us, we've all just diversified. We all make our money. It all comes in from multiple angles, and we don't really leave the house a whole lot.
Yeah.
My wife's been doing census. She's had to do the most hard work recently because she's doing the census, and she's got to go around and
go around and do all those interviews.
Hey, sort of government conspiracy or something.
Hey, I don't want to cut you off here, but we're just about at the end of the show here. We've got about 57 seconds left here, and actually it's about 30 seconds or less. But thanks for calling in, Justin. Let's definitely have you on as a guest, and we'll expand this conversation much deeper. I know Brad had a question about greenhouses, but I guess we'll have to address that on the next show. But thanks for calling in. I greatly appreciate it. Really enjoyed this conversation. Looking forward to expanding this more in the future. Let me just say a couple things here. Thanks to Truth Frequency Radio, and thanks to all the people who participated in the chat and supported us. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week on Comrades and Farms. And that's the break music. Boy, that was a fast 2 hours. Anyway, thank you everyone for watching and participating. We'll see you next time. Thanks for coming. Much appreciated. We'll talk to you soon. Whew. Did I mute my mic? No.
Join up with Shane and the Shift. Yes, a busy hour 3 coming up on the mighty SOR. All right, my friend, I'm just going to run my dogs outside again, and I'll be right back, okay?
All right, awesome.
On the commercials, we got 6 minutes.
And we have some cool swag for you to pick up. All you have to do is head over to our website and click on the SOR Vault. You have a variety of cool logos to choose from and put them on anything you want. T-shirts, hoodies, hats, coffee mugs, you name it, we can get it to you. So do your shopping by supporting the store you love. Get your Spaced Out Radio swag at the SOR Vault today.
The party is always on at the Moose Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is where you want to be when visiting Canada's West Coast. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose cranks up the rock while serving some of the best rated food in the city. The menu starts at $6.95. Why party anywhere else in Vancouver when the Moose is right there? Get your horns up and rock with the Moose, the official party.